My name is Lana. I always thought life's challenges were something distant and abstract, like stories you read in newspapers or watch in movies. I was sure I'd just work in my company, rise up the career ladder, experience both the joys and struggles of work, but never the kind that I'm going through now. My life changed when my grandfather died. You know how it goes. People age, and every time you hear I don't have much time left, you think the world will somehow crack and disappear. But in the end, you just keep living, not realizing that it might be real. He was an incredibly influential man. My grandfather owned a billion-dollar company, one of the most respected people in the business elite. He built an empire that could last for decades, and I was his favorite granddaughter, his heir. But that was before I got the phone call. And now I stood before the doors of his mansion, waiting to meet with the lawyer. Grandfather was always strict but fair. He instilled in me the idea that no one deserves well-being just by birth. It has to be earned. But what does that mean for me when I have to take control of his legacy? I looked around the walls of his house, knowing that one of these rooms would soon be mine if things went as planned. But the plan he had prepared turned out to be much more complicated than I could have imagined. When the lawyer handed me the will, my heart sank. He left me everything. Everything I thought was mine turned out to be just a piece of a much more complex puzzle. Along with the company and billions of assets, he had noted that I must fight to preserve it. I didn't know what to do with that. "Lana," said the lawyer, "your grandfather knew he had little time left, and he prepared some surprises for you." I sat in his office, unable to believe what I was hearing. In my head, so many thoughts were racing. I was used to a life where decisions were made for me, but now I had the key to his empire. Before I could process this news, Emilia appeared. She was the first woman in the company to break through to the position of deputy CEO, and she was the one who offered me the role. Emilia was ambitious. She had her own strategy, her own perspective. She had long been eyeing her rise, but when it became clear that my grandfather left everything to me, she started to see me as an enemy. I was just a girl who had inherited everything and didn't know anything about business. From the moment my grandfather died, Emilia started using every trick to stop me. "You don't understand, Lana," said Emilia during one of our meetings where I was supposed to make decisions about the company's future. "You want to stay in the shadow of your grandfather, but you know he had many enemies. We can't just continue as before." I knew she was right, but what was I supposed to do? This was all that was left after him. I couldn't just hand it over without trying to fight for it, but the fear of making a mistake was unbearable. "Lana, you need to think. We could go through this together," Emilia insisted. "Your job is to be a good manager, and I can take care of all the technical matters." But her words sounded like a trap. It wasn't an offer of help. It was an attempt at manipulation. I refused. I couldn't let her take control. My decision cost me dearly. I felt the weight of responsibility fall on my shoulders. And responsibility, as I now understood, wasn't just about business. It was about personal relationships, and I began to look at them differently. The secrets of my grandfather's life began to surface one by one. Documents, letters, archives. All of it foreshadowed darker turns. One of the letters I found in his personal things cast doubt not only on my loyalty to his empire, but on his very death. "Lana, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer alive. I know you're devoted, but know this. Don't trust everyone, especially those who seem like your friends." I couldn't understand what this meant. Who could have betrayed grandfather? Why had he left such warnings? The more I tried to figure things out, the more complicated my relationships with those around me became. Those who had once seemed like allies now turned into enemies. Soon I realized that my biggest enemy wasn't Emilia, but my own family. My legacy had become part of a much larger game. Every step I took revealed new opportunities for manipulation, and at some point, I found myself at the final edge. I was ready to fight for everything my grandfather had left. He had invested everything in me. And now, Instead of just being a girl who inherited $1 billion, I had become a woman ready to defend his legacy to the end. The first few days after my grandfather's death were a blur. It wasn't just grief. It was the realization that my life had taken a turn that I couldn't reverse. I had inherited not just his wealth, but the entire empire he'd built from the ground up. Every decision, every misstep, now fell squarely on my shoulders. But something felt off. The more I tried to navigate through the legal and business paperwork, the more I felt like someone was watching me, waiting for me to slip. My every move seemed to be under scrutiny, not just from the employees, but from my own family. I kept thinking about the letter he'd left me, the one that warned me about betrayal. It wasn't just paranoia. There was something in the air, a tension I couldn't ignore. I decided to confront Emilia again. I found her in her office, staring out the window. The office was empty, just like the corporate world we inhabited. Cold, sterile, and full of ambition. "I know what you're trying to do, Emilia," I said, walking in without waiting for her to greet me. She turned slowly, a tight smile playing on her lips. "What do you mean?" "Stop playing games. I know what's been going on. The board has been manipulated. The finances have been mismanaged. You've been trying to sabotage me from the beginning." Her smile faltered. She didn't expect me to be so direct. I could see the panic in her eyes for the first time. "You think it's that simple?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're nothing but a girl who inherited a company. You don't have what it takes to run it." I leaned in, my voice low and steady. "I've got more than you think, and I'm not going anywhere." The battle lines had been drawn. I hadn't expected Emilia's reaction to be so frail. For a moment, I saw her mask crack, the carefully constructed confidence crumbling beneath the weight of my accusation. It wasn't just that she was afraid of me. It was that she was afraid of losing control of the empire she'd so carefully plotted to take for herself. Her silence spoke volumes. "You're right about one thing, Emilia," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I may not have the experience you think I need to run this company, but I've got something you don't. I've got the truth on my side. And you've underestimated me." She didn't respond immediately. The air in the room was thick with unspoken threats. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke, her words sharp and cold. "You'll regret this, Lana. I'm not done yet. Not by a long shot." I left her office without another word. Her warning hung in the air, but it didn't faze me. If anything, it solidified my resolve. This was war, and I wasn't about to lose. As days turned into weeks, I began to dig deeper into my grandfather's affairs. I had to. The empire he had built was vast, intricate, and full of dark corners. I needed to understand it all, even the parts that made my skin crawl. That was when I found the first hint of something truly disturbing. Hidden beneath legal contracts, financial records, and spreadsheets were documents detailing the last year of my grandfather's life. He'd kept meticulous records, as he always did, but some of the entries seemed strange. There were references to an unknown person, someone who seemed to be advising him on business matters, someone whose identity had been deliberately erased from the records. My grandfather had always been careful, but this time, he'd missed something. I called the family lawyer, the one who had handled my grandfather's estate. When he arrived at my office, his face was pale. He had a nervous energy about him, and his reluctance was obvious. "Lana," he began, his voice low, almost apologetic. "There's something I need to tell you. It's about your grandfather's will." I looked at him sharply. "What is it?" He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to reveal. "There were changes made, at the very end. Changes that weren't in the final version you received." I sat back in my chair, stunned. "What do you mean?" "Your grandfather made an additional amendment shortly before his death. He altered the beneficiaries of certain assets, specifically the controlling stake in the company. But the changes weren't fully executed. They were only on paper and they weren't made public. I felt the blood drain from my face. So, who is it? Who is the beneficiary? He handed me a folder, thick with legal papers. As I flipped through the pages, my fingers trembling, I found the name I dreaded, Emilia Donovan. She was supposed to inherit control of the company if something happened to my grandfather. It was a backup plan, something he had considered in case I wasn't ready to take the reins. But he'd never mentioned it. Why had he kept this from me? This can't be real, I muttered, more to myself than to him. Why didn't he tell me? Lana, the lawyer said, his voice shaking. There's more. The document was signed by your grandfather's assistant, someone who had access to his personal meetings. I don't know how, but it seems like Emilia had influence over him. She might have been the one who pushed him into making those changes. I stared at the papers in disbelief. My grandfather had trusted Emilia. Had she manipulated him? Had she played on his guilt or fear to secure the company for herself? This was the moment everything shifted. I wasn't sure who I was more angry with, Emilia, who had played me all along, or my grandfather, who had left me with a mess I wasn't prepared for. But there was one thing I knew. I couldn't let her win. I hired a private investigator. It wasn't easy, but the investigator, a former journalist with connections, quickly uncovered a trail of emails, meetings, and phone calls that revealed something shocking. Emilia had been in regular contact with my grandfather's assistant, the one who had signed the last-minute amendments. They had been in communication about the future of the company long before my grandfather's death. She had known the outcome of the will and had probably played a part in influencing it. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that my grandfather had known. He had known what she was planning. But in his final days, he hadn't been strong enough to resist. It all came to a head when I confronted Emilia in the boardroom. This time, I didn't walk in with uncertainty. I walked in with the evidence. You think you can just waltz in here and take everything from me? I asked, my voice icy. You think you can control this empire just because you've been playing behind the scenes? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're a child, Lana. You're playing a game you don't understand. No, Emilia, I said coldly. I understand exactly what's going on here. I know what you did to my grandfather, and I know what you were trying to do to me. I slid the folder across the table. The documents I'd uncovered spread out before her. Her face went pale. You can't prove any of this, she hissed, trying to maintain her composure. I don't need to prove it, Emilia, I said with finality. The truth is all the proof I need. And I'm not going to let you walk away with this company. Not now, not ever. Her eyes flickered with a mix of fury and fear, but she didn't say anything more. She knew she was trapped. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal battles, courtroom dramas, and heated negotiations. But in the end, the truth won. The board sided with me. The will was upheld. Emilia's manipulation was exposed. She lost everything. The company, the power, the wealth, all of it was stripped from her. And me? I inherited it all. Not just the company, but my grandfather's legacy. His empire. And for the first time, I understood what that meant. I moved swiftly to restructure the company, to clean up the mess that had been left behind. But I didn't stop there. I used my newfound position to bring real change, to reshape the company not just into a business, but into something that would honor my grandfather's memory, something that would make him proud. I had become the person my grandfather always believed I could be. The weight of the empire still sits heavy on my shoulders. I will never forget the price it took to get here. It wasn't just money or control or power. It was the people who would do anything to tear you down to get what they want. But I've learned one thing above all else. In the end, what matters is not how much you inherit, but how you choose to carry it. I chose to carry it with integrity, with strength, and with the knowledge that sometimes, even when the world around you is falling apart, the right choice, though painful, is always the one that leads to peace.